You're listening to the RN Mentor, a podcast designed to document and bring you the work and experience of some of the most influential nurses in our profession. We will be sitting down and having a discussion with the leaders of today's nursing world as they share their work, how they navigate their nursing path, and their views on the future of the profession. My name is Ali Tayeb. I am a registered nurse, United States Navy veteran, a Jonas Veterans Healthcare Scholar, and your host for the RN Mentor. Hello and welcome to another episode of the RN Mentor podcast. I'm very excited to be joined today by Kelly Guzman. Kelly is the innovative founder and CEO at Yellow Brick Consulting, Inc., changing how new healthcare facility environments are activated. Yellow Bricks is a certified women-owned healthcare consulting firm specializing in new facility workflow and operations planning, project management, orientation and training, regulatory preparedness, and activation planning services. Kelly and her team collaborate with executives to plan for new facility activation and coordinate the movement of patients into the facility. Yellow Brick's mission is to deliver unparalleled project management expertise to the healthcare industry. Kelly has led a progressive career over the last 35 years in leadership roles in acute and ambulatory settings as a clinician, administrator, and consultant. Her stellar reputation is driven by proven success in leadership, team building, education, communication, and project management. Kelly has led over 100 projects across North America and has established industry best practices leveraging by the healthcare community. Knowledge sharing is one of her core values. Over the years, she has spoken at industry conferences, published journal articles, hosted a podcast, and published 2 books in 2020 and 2021. Kelly was inducted as a fellow into the American Academy of Nursing in October 2023. Welcome to the show, Kelly.
Thank you. And you were my teammate there with your induction. So congratulations to you too.
Thank you. Congratulations to you again. And it was wonderful to see you and share that experience with you. It was somebody was asking about it the other day, and I was like, it's very surreal, the whole process. So yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Agree. It's like the Academy Award of Nursing, I felt like.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Except you have insight into who the winners are. So you don't have to show up and then it's a surprise. So I'll start from my regular question I was asked. My guess is, how did you decide you're going to start in a career as a nurse?
Well, it was not a super straightforward path, but I love the outdoors, and I was a swimmer and wanted to be a marine biologist and dolphin trainer. And really, there wasn't a career for that. In my reach, my mom was a single mom who was a respiratory therapist. So she says, nursing's a 2-year program. Why don't you get your RN degree, and then you can go to school for 10 years or however long it's going to take you to become this marine biologist. And in the process, fell in love with nursing. So it didn't take me 2 years. It took 4 years. All of those prereqs that I had no idea about. So, kind of by my mother telling me and me listening. So it wasn't something I dreamed of my whole life, but I have really enjoyed being a nurse and all of the things that nursing does for you. I think it really is the greatest career.
That's awesome. Moms always do know best, or most of the time know best.
She does tell me to. She's like, "Well, you can go be a marine biologist now." No.
Now so when you decided that you're going to go into the world of nursing, how did you decide, or what do you think some of the pathways that you took to advance yourself through various roles in the world of nursing? So let's say you graduated, and what was your first position?
So I graduated in 1987, and I did a 2-year program, an ADN program. So I was a pediatric nurse, and I was 21, And I remember going as a nursing student into the like med surg floor, and everybody seemed so old to me, and just it was very scary. It was a very different world for me. And in pediatrics, I was like, at least I'm older than the patients. And I loved the kids. And it was the very first time that in nursing, they were actually, when we did our like our internship, when they did your placement, that I got to do. My preceptor was in pediatrics, so I spent 12 weeks, following and being mentored by somebody, and then just was an easy pathway for me to be hired into that pediatric position. So I did that, and then I went straight into the PICU, and that's really where I feel like I fell in love with nursing in the PICU. I loved the critical care. I loved the chemistry. I love watching the kids. They're so resilient. They'd be so sick. And then the recovery and just like how well they did and bonding with the families and that type of stuff. So, but at the time, I feel like it's very much like we are now, where the was a big, huge nursing shortage. So I became a supervisor in my second year in nursing.
Oh,
So
wow.
I did that kind of flip role where you're doing 5 shifts of clinical and then 2 shifts of admin, but they always called you on your days off. So it kind of was more like 8 days of clinical and 4 days of admin. But it was great because I had people who were older than me and had much more experience but didn't want the position. So they're very supportive. So I feel like my whole experience in leadership has been kind of an advisory where, I had that, quote unquote, legitimate power, but I had none of the knowledge or expertise. So I was constantly like looking for people to help me to figure out how to do it. So I do feel very lucky in that sense that it was a really good experience.
What was your impetus to go with getting more education and eventually growing, sort of, I would say, growing yourself out of those bedside roles?
I think looking at, as I was a manager and was exposed to the bigger organization, I realized there was absolutely zero power in pediatrics because we didn't get any of the money. So when we needed, kind of thermometers and just like kind of some of the basic equipment, it always went to the ORs and to the ER. And I also felt like my experience in teaching could have been better. So I thought, I want to become a teacher. So I felt like I needed to get adult experience. So I actually transitioned over to the emergency department, got my bachelor's degree, was again like a supervisor there because they were like, well, you don't need to know ER per se, but you know how to be a manager. So I did again like clinical shifts, and I was the supervisor, which was kind of an interesting role. But and then when I graduated from got my bachelor's degree, I did some clinical rotations in teaching, and at Rio Hondo College, which is where I went. And interestingly enough, my sister was in my very first class,
Oh,
so that was fun. But I have a huge appreciation for the teachers and the professors who do this forever. But I just thought like year after year for me to be teaching and doing the same thing, that just kind of seems so monotonous to me. And I loved the energy of the ER. So as I was, kind of going down this education path, I was like, okay, this is definitely not for me. I enjoyed it for a few years and then said, I like what I'm doing in terms of being able to still work at the bedside and do clinical and then be in management. So I actually went back and got my master's degree in nursing administration because I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I felt like I kept getting put into these manager positions because I became the director of the emergency department, and I felt like I needed some foundation to help me there. So it was a circuitous way to get into it, but I think that the information and the knowledge that you get while you're in school it's so helpful because nobody really trains you in nursing school about budgets, about finance. So I think that education really helped me to figure out how to have a better like management style, if you will.
yeah, that's definitely helpful. And I always tell people you never know what you don't know. Whenever you go into a master's program, it gives you a different perspective. When you go into a doctoral program, it gives you a different perspective. In addition to the experience, because you get exposed to things that you may not necessarily get exposed to, like doing the on-the-job training format, which
Oh
some
yeah.
people have their entire careers on the job training, which is fine, which works for them. but the education really opens your eyes to some things that you may not have the opportunity to get exposed to. And I think that's one of the key factors. I always encourage people, if you can, to go for like a higher level degree or a different degree, just the perspectives change. And I think that that's important, because I've had colleagues that have gone out of the world of nursing. They've gone into a different field to get their master's or doctoral degrees, and it's just a different perspective. And I
Hmm.
think that's what the one of the key things is, like that different perspective that you bring back into your work. I think is key.
I do think that theoretical framework, so having a framework that you can use and kind of go back to and say, like, well, how does this fit into the bigger picture? And like when you're looking at an organization or when you're looking at an objective to do something, like how do you put this together and put that framework around it? So I feel like that really helped me to again, like step back and think about like how do I spend my time? What is it that I'm investing my personal time into? What are things that are working, what isn't working, and then how can I fix those things? And so it always came back to like I love the nursing process of like assess, plan, implement, evaluate. I use it for everything, and I tell people when I don't know how to do something, because you're as a nurse you're constantly thrown into things that you don't know how to do, but you're like you assess the situation, come up with a plan, you implement it, you look and evaluate it and say, hey, what worked, what didn't, and then you adjust and you kind of just keep going. So
Yeah,
it's that iterative process that I think has, for me, has just been super helpful throughout my life.
that's great. Now I definitely want to spend a lot of time talking about the work that the entrepreneurial work that you got into, because I think that's an area we don't see enough of in the world of nursing, where nurses kind of head away from the traditional, whether you're academia or your service line, but you kind of went like a little bit more over, but still utilizing your skill sets as a nurse.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what was your thought process when you said, you know what, I think I might want to do this, like build this company?
Well, I was at UCLA, and my position there is the clinical director over ambulatory and interventional services. So I was the clinical voice reporting up as a dotted line through the CNO there, because at the time I had reported to the COO. So I had like this really super cool, and it was one of my favorite jobs. And I don't think I would have left it if I wouldn't have done this next thing, because I loved that job because there were so many different departments that I got to interact with, and I really got to go in and do projects. And that's when I realized like I love project management. So you'd get those projects. So because of that, we were building 2 new hospitals at UCLA, and they were looking for somebody to run those projects. And so I was actually asked to do it. And I was like, I don't know anything about construction. I don't like dirt. I love my job. Like, what am I going to do when I'm done? Because the project's going to end, and I think everybody thinks about like, well, what is my future? What's going to happen to me after this? Right. And um, the CEO was super persuasive and was like, you need to do this. This will be great. You'll learn a lot and you'll always have a job. And I like being scared. I feel like kind of one of things my whole life has been like, as soon as I feel comfortable, like I never want to be that person who's like, oh yeah, we've always done it that way. Or the dinosaur, like, which I feel like in nursing, when I kind of started, I was like, you've been here for 35 years. Like, what in the world are you doing? Like, I always want to challenge myself. So I think that's always just been something as part of me, like that's constantly wanting to like learn or understand like how things are happening. So when that happened, I was looking to hire consultants, and there really weren't there weren't many. I mean, there were some, but that was kind of that other piece where I was like, there's money from, the SB 1953 to get the hospitals up to standard. So there was a lot of work, and I knew other people who were doing this. So I thought like, hey, I'll jump into the consulting world. And I would say in nursing in general, like we beat each other up, right? So we're not known for mentoring and helping our young. Like we step on them, we're mean to them, like we're terrible. I think I lost 9 pounds in 1 month when I went to work in the ER because it was so stressful.
Yeah.
And but it makes you resilient, right? Like you're like, I can do this. You're not going to break me. So I feel like the that piece of nursing, and then, interacting with physicians and standing up for your patients and being a good advocate, like those are things that you learn as a nurse. And I mean, I don't know any nurse who hasn't ever cried. You really do go home sometimes like you're beat up for various reasons, but you figure it out and you go forward. So like all I thought was like, well, worst case scenario, I'll just go back and find some other job in nursing, because you can do anything in nursing. So,
Very true.
but it seemed like a very kind of ideal time for me to do it. But I have to tell you, there weren't a lot of people who were like, oh, this is a great idea. They're like, well, what are you going to do when you don't have a job? And what are you going to do when you fail? And I was like, well, I'm not planning on failing, So I think just having that part, throughout our lives as nurses, I wish we could be better to each other. And I think that's why I've always wanted, like, mentored people and kind of helped them to say, like, you're going to get through this, or here's how I got through that. And here's how you need to think about the future. And like, don't let that person get you down and get them out of your head. So I think all of those things really gave me the courage to say, let me go try this. And I mean, quite honestly, the first year was horrible. It was absolutely miserable. Like, people were slamming the doors in my face and they were super rude, and nobody wants to talk to a consultant. So it wasn't this like super sexy path, or, kind of like, oh, I have this wonderful consulting role. It was really awful. And then, I remember when we got our first big contract, and we were so excited because it was like we finally got work. And then, it just kind of built from there. But I do think, like, the skills that you learn in nursing from, again, like advocating, learning to find your voice, making sure that you're being heard. All of those things were helpful for me. So I don't know that it was necessarily like, I'm going to go be this entrepreneur, but I had already taken on jobs that I had never done before. So this just seemed like another kind of thing like that, where you said, sure, I'll try it. And I turned it into something different.
Yeah. Did you have any mentors when you went into the consulting world? Was there somebody that you were able to tap into and say, "Hey, this is I'm running into like a wall here, or this is something I'm not familiar with." Did you have anybody like that?
We had a group of people. So I've also been a big organization person, as you know. So I was a member of NON, and when I was in the ER, the ENA, and ACNL, and those types of organizations. So I've always felt like professional organizations are really important to your growth and finding somebody who's doing other things professionally. So when I was at UCLA, I called out to other people, and actually, when I worked at the last company that I was with, that founder had reached out to me. And so a whole bunch of us got together, and it was more of like a networking and saying, hey, this is what I'm doing. What are you doing?
Oh, nice.
What was terrible was when people finished their projects, they left. Because they had to go back to their jobs. And I would say most people do this, and then they return to something in their organizations. Like, a lot of people don't leave and do this full time. So that part was kind of frustrating for us, because, it was difficult to find membership. But then probably about, I don't know, I was maybe 6 years into it, and I ran into Debbie Gregory, who was the founder of the Nursing Institute for Healthcare Design. And then she, that's really how I became involved with that organization. And I was like, oh my goodness, I found my people. Because these were people who actually lived in design, and they stayed in it. And they didn't exactly do what I was doing, but I felt like we were able to share stories. And I would say people who are doing this really are supportive and very helpful. It wasn't like they were just trying to hoard their knowledge. They were very willing to share, and I've been willing to share. So so kind of, but I would say it was more collaborative, because I didn't really find this organization until much later.
Yeah. Which is interesting, but the National Institute for Healthcare Design is not necessarily nurses, right? These are people
Correct.
from
Yeah.
various industries that are in this niche area.
Most, I would say like 80% of the membership is nursing, but it is anybody like architects, designers, planners. Just we have industry partners who help us think through, just like the various elements of design. But, you go back to Florence and she said, like, have open air, wash. So a lot of the elements that, Florence Nightingale taught are part of nursing, but, we focus on the actual bedside care and even acute care. I've done so much, like right now our work is split between acute and ambulatory, and now we're looking at all this behavioral health. So kind of like as it creeps out into the home, into just other areas, it really is the bigger piece of nursing, instead of just like I was focused so much of my life on acute care, which I loved, but this has really been fun.
Yeah, I can imagine. Um, well, why don't you tell us a little bit more about like your operation at Yellow Bricks?
Sure. So we primarily do transition and activation planning, and we just got certified as a minority business as well.
Congratulations.
So I'm excited about that. But we work 100% in healthcare, and our team includes clinicians or people who've had like a clinical background, an operational background, people who are like data analysts and engineers. And then we also have like part-time people who come in and help, who are like subject matter experts in their specialty. So like OR or ER, outpatient. We do a lot of infusion centers and things like that. But what we do is we really serve as like a clinical project manager to help translate what happened during the design process. So typically there's all of this time that gets spent in designing and putting the blueprints together. Then it goes back to, schematic design to like get checked. And then it gets built. So during that time in California, it could be like 7 years later. And as you know, there's turnover. So then when you go to like move in, I've never been in a facility where somebody said, "Oh, this is the greatest design ever." So we help to translate and take those drawings, look at the basis of design, which tells you what the people were thinking at that time. There's this functional narrative that you read to say, we have 24 beds and, distributed nurse stations. So you read that, and then you help to work with the people to say, like, this is how we're going to be moving into the space. So we service project managers, like healthcare project managers, really do a lot of work with of workflow. So things that are new, things that are different. I would say we spend a lot of our time with IT integration. So taking people who have never had any IT integration or systems like robots or pneumatic tubes, and help them kind of think about how their world is going to change and what are the skills that they're going to need and the competencies. So we help them develop orientation and training programs. And I'd say the funnest thing that we do is a program called dress rehearsal, where we simulate live operations. So we write scripted scenarios, and we spend a whole day with, sometimes we've had 900 people in the building, like acting like it was a live hospital, and testing the system to make sure that it works on day one. And so it really helps. I'd say the thing that we've measured is the confidence of the staff to feel comfortable on day one. Because I moved into a building where they were like, just go do your job. And we had like no idea where anything was. So it is a personal kind of mission of mine to like make sure that everybody feels safe. You're not going to feel completely comfortable, but you're going to feel safe. You're going to know where things are. So we do that. And then we help with the move planning. So how are you going to take, we're working right now to get like 300 patients, or we're at a hospital in Atlanta, and we're going to move across the city with a whole bunch of babies, so
Wow.
working through the logistics of doing all of that. So it's a lot of long-term planning. And I do feel like it's much more of kind of, the real strategy piece of nursing, because we're looking at like, how is this going to be impacted for the next 50 years, 30 to 50 years, because that's how long the buildings last. Like
Right.
most people don't get a new building for another, that many years. So we do that. We do a lot of regulatory compliance, particularly in California, because we are the most regulated state in the union. So that's kind of another element that gets folded into the work that we do.
Yeah. Um, I want to touch a little bit on, by the way, that all sounds amazing and complicated all at the same time. So, uh, You must have a really, really incredible team because I know, we've talked here previously, and having had so many projects under your belt, I'm sure you must be doing good work if they keep bringing you back. So, so from the perspective of a business owner who is a nurse, because I'm sure some of our listeners are thinking about being entrepreneurs, thinking about creating their own business. What are some maybe pearls of wisdom that you can share for somebody who is a nurse and trying to take that skill set into a business world?
Yeah, again, I think just the courage. I mean, it's one of our values, but you have to be able and willing to just kind of fall on your face and say, "Oh, it's fine. I'm going to get up and do it again," or whatever. So, just being willing to kind of either raise your hand or move forward and say, "Hey, I'm going to try this." I know there's a lot more nurse entrepreneurs out there that I've spoken to, but for me personally, I am very much a planner. Like I mean, I already know what's going to happen in the next 3 years, or whatever, like weekends and stuff. And um, when I started this, I was like, oh, I need to develop my strategic plan, my business model, my return on investment, like all of this stuff. And then I read this book called The Art of the Start by Guy Kawasaki. And he basically said, just go get the work and then, kind of figure it out afterwards. Like you definitely need a strategy, but if you wait until everything's perfect, it never is going to be. And I would say that's the one thing with nursing and particularly educators, right? They want everything to be like, you know, accurate and perfect. And in this work, it's like you're moving in and you have to get things finished. So you kind of have to be okay with like 85, 90% and say, we'll work on this other 10%, and hope and pray that it works. But, again, like with the information that you have and your critical thinking skills, I think that it has really been helpful for me. But I do think like the finance piece of it, again, I don't think that in nursing we do a good job of training nurses to understand, what do things cost and how much time do you spend doing things. So, when I was at my first hospital, we were taught about productivity very early on. And so we knew like how many hours per patient day, how many dollars per patient day. And so, I always just figured it out in my head, like, okay, we need to see this many patients and we'll be fine. I don't have to worry about it for the year. So
Yeah.
it's the same thing with projects where you get in there and say, like, you need to figure out, like, what is your business model going to look like? I think nurses, a lot of times, like, either undervalue themselves and say, well, I'm not going to charge that much. And I work with people. I'm like, why wouldn't you charge more? Like, this is how much time it took you. And so just really having a good understanding of like, well, what is your market? What are you going to do? And can you clearly articulate that? Because, again, like with us, the door was slammed in our face because we couldn't really explain, like, why did you need us? Like, so what's that value proposition? Like, what is it that I'm going to bring to the table? And now we tell people, like, you've never done this before. So we're going to save you time because we have tools, we have templates, we have plans, we have the expertise. We can basically kind of just come in and make this happen for you. So I think as an entrepreneur, thinking about that, like, well, what is it that you're going to do that's going to either help or provide that value? And can you articulate that?
Yeah. Um, what do you think has been the key to your success at this point in this business?
I do think that I mean, I have an incredible team. I really do. I think that we, as consultants, we go in and we say, like, we're going to actually do this work. And we do a lot of homework ahead of time. So we don't come to a meeting unprepared. So I think being prepared, I can't tell you how many times I've been in meetings. I'm like, well, where's the agenda? Like, what's going on? Because we were invited. And so, one of our kind of just pillars is always have an agenda, even if it isn't your meeting, because then if we're going to be there, there's things that we want to get taken care of and we can take care of our own agenda. So like we can take the meeting over and get our work done.
Right.
But I think just being consistent, clarifying, really listening. I have a rule, like if somebody says something to me 3 times, like there's something going on, like we need to respond to that. So I know personally, like I was a director for so many years and the consultants would show up and just dump stuff on my desk. And so we try to develop tools that are like 80% there. So it's fill in the blank, and we're making it as easy as possible for you. But I do think like relationships, being available, listening, not just kind of one size fits all. So like listening to the clients to say like this is important to them culturally, and then taking lessons learned and not just saying like, hey, this is what Stanford did or UCLA did. And it's like, hey, you're a community hospital. You should be looking at what this other community hospital is doing. So really like customizing it and understanding like what it is that they need. But I do think like our team just as a group, like when somebody drops the ball, like there's always somebody there to pick it up, and we work together really well. Because I thought when I left and I went on my own, I was like, oh gosh, I'm gonna have to climb this hill again. But I had the experience, and I was like, I can do this. And I had clients reaching out saying, well, no, we want to work with you and your team, which was, and I didn't have a team. I'm like, well, it's me. so I want to take some time off, but it was really, I mean, in that sense, it was very flattering. But I think, when we go back and ask, like, what is it? And they're like, you consistently provide like the same quality, and, it's on time. We think ahead. We help them to prioritize what's important, not waste their time. If we don't need an hour, we take 15 minutes if we need it. So really just thinking like putting ourselves in their shoes and trying to be as helpful as possible.
That's helpful. Now you mentioned you now are recognized as a minority-owned business. How was it for you being again, we're in a primarily white female-dominated profession. How was it for you as a non-white person to go not only in the world of nursing, but really in the world of entrepreneurial kind of a role as a nurse? How was that for you? Did you face any barriers, or was everything as expected? How was that for you?
It's interesting because I think as a woman, I mean, even though we're in nursing, you're still kind of in that kind of there's sexism, and I mean, there's been so many changes from when I started, having physicians, not that it was acceptable, but they regularly yelled and threw things and said bad stuff and said sexist things. And, I was like, they can't say that. And the older nurses were like, oh, they
Yeah.
don't mean anything by it. And like, I kind of just was like, oh, okay. And so I think just having lived through this and watching to see like through Me Too, I feel like Me Too really helped me move forward, even though it had nothing to do with why I was starting my company. But I think just people were kind of like upset. But I think that as nurses and just in women in general, like you're constantly faced with, some of those biases. But in terms of like being Hispanic, one of my professors at UCLA was like, do you know, like statistically, like here's where you are? And the statistics just sounded awful to me. And I was like, well, why is that?
Yeah.
And I don't think like I necessarily paid as much attention as I should have, but she brought that to my attention, and I did become active in the National Association of Hispanic Nurses. And I would say not as much my personal experience, but the students that I mentored who shared with me that the professors were very racist to them and said like, well, you're just going to go have babies. Why are you taking somebody's spot? And
Wow.
so kind of trying to, again, like step back, and I've always just said, like, think of the future, think about where you want to be and what is it that you can do to go and take that power so that you have influence. And, because at the time, like there isn't a lot that you can do. You really do feel victimized of like being there. And sometimes just like, did this really happen? And I was mentored by a wonderful person, Tammy Brailsford, who was a COO, and I was in a lot of meetings with her where, she allowed me to like write all of my questions. And at that time, I mean, literally we would just get excused. And I was like, did they really just do that? Like kind of wave their hand and tell you to go away. And she's like, oh, you bet it, like, you betcha, sister. And I was like, what does this mean? So I think just one, being aware, like this is what exists. And then you kind of just say, oh, it's fine. Like you kind of let it roll off your back. But you really do in the world, as you know, you have to pick and choose your battles of, where do you want to spend your energy. And so I feel like when I'm faced with that, I don't really give them my energy or my power. I keep it. And I'm like, here's what I'm going to do. Here's how I'm going to live my life. I'm going to try to help as many, disadvantaged people as possible, and really make sure that like all of the colors and all of the sexes are represented. So I feel like I've spent more energy doing that than kind of dwelling on like, why is this happening to me, or, just those types of things.
Yeah. Makes sense. Um, I want to touch on another point because I think it's, I I've had, I purposefully have a diverse group of individuals on this show because representation, especially in academia, isn't really there. We don't have all the colors of the rainbow represented in academia, and that's problematic from my perspective and a lot of other people's perspective. Um, how do you, what do you think is missing in attracting more? Like I'm in LA, but we still, even in LA, we have a hard time attracting enough Hispanic nurses into the world of nursing, and especially like when you start getting into like master's degrees or doctoral programs, they're almost become like
Exclusive.
invisible. So what do you think the profession, what do you think the profession is not doing, or what are we not doing? Perhaps even maybe at the junior high school or middle school or high school level that we're not attracting the population? How are we not supporting this population?
I think it's, when you walk in and you look around and you don't see anybody who looks like you, it really takes a rare person to kind of come out and say like, hey, let me like invite you to my clique. And it is a
Yeah,
clique, and you don't fit in, and you're the person who stands out. And so you have to be that, the Rosa Parks who sits down, or, like the one person who's going to say like, I'm going to be the person to pave the way for others. So I do think it's like somebody who has a super strong disposition to say like, this is what my goal is for the future, because it isn't going to happen with that one person. I do think like there's awareness, but there isn't like this training, and I don't think people really still understand like how biased they are, or how racist they are, or how set in their values or their way. And I think just, I'm from Los Angeles, so we've been exposed to a lot of different cultures. But I mean, I didn't really grow up. I went to Catholic school, so I didn't really know anybody who was Jewish until I became, and I think, much older in my life. And I was like, oh wow, like there was this whole different culture. And not that it was good or bad, but I think sometimes like if you don't even know and you're not exposed to
yeah,
things, like you don't really know how you think. So my husband is 100% white, and I tell him this all the time. I said, he's like, you just don't think the way, you don't understand like the stresses that I have to go through, just as a woman, as somebody who's smaller. Like, so when I travel, because I travel all over, so I'm like, I have to get on the first flight because I don't know where I'm landing. I don't know if it's safe. I don't know who's going to follow me. So, there's those types of things. But I think just all of those experiences, like, people tend to go with their, friends, or you hire people who look like you or act like you. So in academia, where you're primarily white and, women, it's like that's who they're attracted to. So I think to teach that bias and understand like, well, what does this mean? And, I said, I at home, I'm like, here's what you're doing that's biased. Like you don't even recognize it. So, and and I think obviously like we're married, so it's not like he's completely like this racist person, but it's, I think that just unaware of like what your thoughts are, or how you were raised, I guess. But I do think it's going to take somebody who is very strong and committed, and then a faculty and a dean who is open to, and they make it either a requirement, or to like mentor. I do think mentoring is super helpful, because you need coaching. You really need a sponsor for somebody to come in and help you. Like, hey, here's how you behave. Here's what you say. Because we weren't taught how to be either a teacher or a consultant or a leader. we've fallen along the way, right? But we've all had really great mentors and sponsor. You need a sponsor who's going to say, hey, let Ollie lead this committee, let this person lead, let this person be in charge, and then help them to be successful. You don't just become successful. You are, trained, you are helped along the way. And I think that's probably the biggest area, not just in academia, but I think all of nursing leadership and healthcare leadership where, we're getting better, but we're still short.
Yeah. I mean, from my perspective, although I fall under the carrot, if you give me a form and it on the form, I have to check the I'm white, but being from the Middle East, I don't identify as white, right? Because
Right.
the culture is different and the languages are different and the traditions are different. So I don't identify. I do have the privilege of looking white though. So it's very interesting. But from a male perspective in this profession, some of the same concepts because there isn't that many of us and we're not from a percentage perspective, we're not really growing. And it seems to be the same with a lot of the other, like when we look at other ethnicities and as well, there isn't much growth in the
Mm-hmm.
profession. So I want to say we're almost feels like it's sort of stalled and
So, yep.
we haven't done whatever else we need to do to push it past that initial barrier. So I think it's important that we need to figure that out and we need to figure it out
I think these
soon.
these lean in circles, I've seen some and participated in some, I think are helpful, but like to your point earlier, it needs to start in school. It needs to start when you're young and your eyes are, open to everything and that it's expected and
Yeah.
it is part of who you are and it's your values. So if you can do that, because I don't think as women we always necessarily like support each other, and there's still this like cattiness occasionally that I run up against, and sometimes I'm like, oh, thank goodness it's a man that I'm going to have to deal with. It's going to be so much easier. I mean, which is terrible to say, I mean, I really do. And, sometimes it is easier, but I think because women are like, I need to follow the book. I need to do this. Like, I need to stick to these rules. And, in my experience, it's just been like men have been in power longer. And so they're like, okay, I'm going to figure out how to get what I want within the guidelines of these rules, where
Yeah.
like women, we kind of stick to the rules a little bit more. So, I mean, I'm always telling people like, just go do it. Just get out there. You'll figure, like I say, no, figure it out later, which is something I would have never done. But like, I was like, yeah, it'll work out. You might be up all night long. You might be recruiting your friends and family to help you like get this work done. But
Yeah.
like that, there's kind of like those little, cliffs you just got to jump off.
Yeah, definitely true. Um, I want to be cognizant of our time and your time. So anything else you want to share with us? Because I can talk to you about this stuff like I think all day.
Probably no, but I do think, I think for nurses, don't be blinded by people either telling you that you can't do something or that you're not ready. I applied for lots of jobs that I never got, and I was like, oh, eventually I'm going to get this, or this is what I want to do. So you need to be your biggest cheerleader. Find people who are going to be supportive of you, and keep them in your corners. I have like a great group of friends who have been support my whole life. So I do think like that's part of like what's really helpful. But again, like I think in nursing school, that's the other piece I think that needs to change. They were teaching you to become acute care nursing when there's clinics, when there's school nursing and public health nursing, and there's so many other pieces, but like there's this curriculum and there's just kind of this standard that we need. So don't limit yourself by what you know is in front of you or by doing what's easy. Do what you love to do, and I think you'll be happy.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I do want to put a plug in for the National Association of Hispanic Nurses. I've had the privilege of working with them several times, the LA chapter one, uh,
The
and
best.
uh, and and anybody listening to so I want to encourage people to step out of their comfort zones and engage with various nursing associations, even though
Mm-hmm.
there's the Black Nurse Associations, there's the MPs of color, there is the the
Filipino
and Asian American. There's the Hawaiian Native Nurses Association. So there's a lot of different associations out there that I think people can engage with, and just to learn about the various cultures and influences within the world of nursing, because I think it's key to some of the successes that we can have in the profession. So again, greatly appreciate you being on the show. We've been listening to Kelly Guzman. She is the CEO at founder and CEO at Yellow Brick Consulting, Inc. Thank you very much, and I look forward to bringing you more incredible guests in the near future.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the RN Mentor with your host, Ali Tayeb. Please don't forget to visit www.alirtayeb.com. That's www.alirtayeb.com for podcast notes and resources, and don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, I wish you fair winds and following seas.